So as you can imagine, the Foreign Secretary is at the moment principally occupied with dealing with the issues relating to the war in Ukraine. You would not have thought that Gibraltar would be an issue that the British Foreign Secretary would put at the top of her agenda at this moment, even though it's hugely important, of course primarily important to us, but the question is where in the hierarchy of importance for the United Kingdom is Gibraltar at this time. And today's meeting is a demonstration that the United Kingdom government, the Foreign Secretary in particular, is prepared to find time for Gibraltar even at this difficult moment as we go in the run-up to the Easter break, when we expect that we will have a number of important meetings in the context of the EU-UK negotiation for a future treaty, and we need to give our teams a steer and direction for that final, we hope, part of the negotiation. And the atmosphere was therefore very positive between us and very collegiate as we look to continue our work as one British delegation, one British team in that negotiation with the European Union.
You've said before, obviously, that you can't give us a blow-by-blow account of what's happening in those negotiations, but because of how busy a time it is for international diplomacy and the fact that the Foreign Secretary will be looking at matters to do with Ukraine and Russia, among others, how realistic is it then that this Easter target date will still be reached?
Well, let me tell you two things, because I think your question has two prongs to it, which is important. The first is the question of transparency in the negotiations. Look, you cannot have a camera, a webcam in the negotiations for everybody to be seeing what is happening in the context of every blow of the negotiations, because all you would have would be the impossibility to be able to advance things. But I can tell you that if there were such a webcam, nobody would be surprised by the statements, positions, or reactions of the government of Gibraltar or the government of the United Kingdom in the context of the things that may be put in that negotiation. It is the position that we set out publicly, because we have no dual position where we say one thing in public about issues and a separate thing in private about issues. So nobody should be speculating with any credibility that what is going on in the negotiating room is contrary to the positions that the government of Gibraltar has repeatedly put, the things that I and my colleagues have stood for, in my case for 30 years, in Joe Bolsonaro's case for 50 years. The second question is whether or not we will be able to achieve an agreement in time for the Easter break. Well, I can't tell you that we will, but we continue to try is the answer, because we all recognize that the issues between us are now very few. They are, of course, the issues that have dogged the relationship for some time, and they always will return to have to be dealt with in different ways, and we're trying to ensure that the way that we deal with them in this negotiation leads to a long-lasting settlement between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Remember, it's the UK and the EU, not the UK and Spain, that enables Gibraltar to have a relationship with principally Spain as our neighbour member state, but the whole of the European Union in the key area of mobility, that is to say, immigration and the movement of goods. That's what the negotiation is about, and that's what we hope we will be able to deal with between now and Easter, so that at least we can say, well, look, we haven't got a treaty text that is agreed, and if there were a treaty text at the moment, I think it would be very disagreeable to the European Union if they saw what the United Kingdom might propose, and it would be very disagreeable to Gibraltar and the United Kingdom if we saw what the European Union and Spain might propose at this stage in the negotiation. So we hope to be able to get to the stage where we can have that agreement of principles between the UK on the one part and the European Union of the other part by Easter, with a treaty text to follow.
And again, another reference to a no negotiated outcome and planning for that eventuality. You've been very keen from the start to be in a position to say, if the deal is right, we will bring it forward, and if it isn't, we'll walk away.
That's right, and that's why we must prudently plan for a no negotiated outcome, and that is work that has principally been done in Gibraltar by the Deputy Chief Minister, who has been methodical, as he always is, on these difficult and issues which require careful attention, and work that is being done by principally the Minister for Europe in the United Kingdom, but the Foreign Secretary and I were able to touch upon those issues. The areas where we still have concerns are the areas where we think we are ready for the prospect of a negotiated outcome, although we still very much believe that we will have a treaty, and even if we don't have it by Easter because of the intervening issues, my goodness, we've had COVID, a second COVID Omicron wave, now we have the war in Ukraine, but we do believe that it will be possible to end this process with a negotiated outcome that produces an agreement in the United Kingdom and the European Union. The only way that we will do that, though, is to be ready not to have a negotiated outcome, and that's really why we put so much effort into that work.
Okay, and your meeting also covered the super yacht that was arrested in Gibraltar yesterday. What's the significance of that arrest?
Well, I think it's important that people understand that this is an arrest in civil proceedings. The government has not had to act under the sanctions regime at this stage, because by the time the vessel came into British Gibraltar territorial waters, the Admiralty Marshal of the Supreme Court of Gibraltar had ordered that it should be arrested at the suit of a bank that gave a mortgage to the ultimate beneficial owner at the time that he was purchasing or otherwise dealing with the yacht. The government will only have to act if the vessel is no longer subject to an arrest for whatever reason, and it hasn't been sold to a third party who is not sanctioned, or if there is a surplus after the action against the mortgage has taken place and the vessel has been sold. That surplus of monies could be a surplus of monies that has to be subject to a sanctions freezing rather than a civil proceeding to arrest or otherwise freeze those monies. And that is something, therefore, the government has to intervene in the proceedings to ensure is dealt with in keeping with the UK and EU sanctions regime which is applicable in Gibraltar.
There's been considerable interest in the UK and EU and American sanctions taken as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. What can you tell us about the significance of the arrested super yacht in the context of those sanctions?
Well, I think it sends the most visible signal of all the signals that we have sent in the past month, that our port is closed to Putin's people. Our financial services are not available to anybody who is an associate of Vladimir Putin, or at the moment even a person who is simply from Russia or Russian origin. We're going to ensure that we can use the sanctions regime, although Gibraltar is a small part of that internationally, to put the maximum pressure on Vladimir Putin's murderous regime that is obviously committing what are clear war crimes in Ukraine at the moment. And Gibraltar is not going to permit itself to be used as a way through that international regime. We're going to form part of the international community's pressure against Mr. Putin and Russia.